Welcome back to the Evolving Warfighter as we continue our series, A Leader's Guide for Addressing Suicide. Today I have a special issue for you concerning the Army Chaplain Corps. This video was born out of the fact that I realized I had a significant degree of ignorance when I was writing this article and making this video series about what actually the Chaplain Corps could do for a soldier that was suicidal. Wanting to know more about the Chaplain Corps and how they address these issues, I called up a good friend, Pastor Joe Kumor, to see if he could sit down and answer some questions, having the experience of being an Army chaplain. Luckily, I caught him on his way back to taking his kids out shooting. You have experience being an Army chaplain, so I have to ask you, is there kind of a standardized approach that you use if you had like a suicidal soldier referred to you, kind of where you'd begin in terms of helping them, or what questions or support you'd try to gain for them?
Well, that's a good question. There is not really a set standard for suicidal soldiers coming to chaplains. Generally speaking, it's mostly the chaplain looking into coping mechanisms and support structures, as those are two of the main ways to cope with suicidal issues. After that, it just gets into the personality of the chaplain, how they feel the situation is going with the person coming to the chaplain. It all kind of depends, but generally speaking, it's mostly getting into support structures and coping mechanisms.
So, as we were talking earlier before we started recording this, you said that chaplains, one of the great advantages of them is they have a lot of knowledge in terms of just the ability to be good counselors, because it's built into your education in terms of becoming a chaplain, and they're a great resource. So say we have a non-religious soldier that says, hey, I don't believe, I don't have any faith, the Chaplain Corps becomes still a great asset to them in terms of it's just a chance to sit down with someone that might just be kind of a good communicator and willing to listen. Absolutely.
Chaplains, of course, are religious support leaders. But also we have a lot of training other than just religious support. Most chaplains have very extensive counseling experience, whether that's through their schooling or in their civilian ministry. So with all the counseling classes and experience that we have, we can assist religious-minded soldiers as well as non-religious soldiers. And so yeah, a lot of it is just learning how to talk to people, listening, active listening, and offering advice when needed or desired. But yeah, we have generally we have more experience than the average Army officer or leader, and so we're a resource for the non-religious soldiers as well as the religious soldiers.
The Army spends a lot of time trying to train soldiers just on kind of suicide awareness, and then has some programs to do suicide intervention. But so based on your personal experience, is there anything that you wish that they would add or change or make better in those programs?
That's a good question. I think the Army does a decent job. We have the ASSIST program, the ACE program. We have a lot of different attempts at dealing with the suicide issue. I think personally one of the main problems that we have in the military today is a lack of connecting between soldiers. Just based on my experience from enlisting 20 years ago. It seems that soldiers were a lot more able to connect with each other, and whether it's social media today or cell phones or whatever, maybe that's just Grumpy Joe talking, but soldiers have a problem connecting. So all of the suicide classes that I participate in teaching basically deal with how to talk to people and walking people through their problems, which seems a natural thing many years ago. So to answer your question, what I would like to see change isn't so much Army classes, it's just somehow gaining more teamwork, more connecting, more the ability to talk to each other. And I don't know what that looks like.
So obviously with the nature of the Guard and Reserve, they had significantly more challenge in that area than, say, active duty folks that are with each other every day of the week.
Absolutely. National Guard and Reserves has a definite challenge just based on 1 week and month, 2 weeks in the summer. Commanders and leaders only have a few days a month, a few weeks a year to impact their soldiers. And so that's definitely a challenge for National Guard Reserve.
So I know that you told me you had a number of soldiers call you, whether they were directly connected to your unit or they knew you from, well, battle buddies in different units over this last Christmas season, or holiday season, I should say. Is there common trends about what you saw that made those kind of soldiers reach a tipping point to say, hey, I feel suicidal?
Well, it seems, now that you mentioned, it seems that all those soldiers had some similar issues, mostly revolving around relationships, finances, and sometimes some kind of career issue. So yeah, those are probably the big three: issues in relationships, finances, and careers. And a lot of substance abuse, coping mechanism problems.
So is there a special approach that the Chaplain Corps uses to deal with suicidal soldiers that kind of is unique to the Chaplain Corps?
Well, you might be disappointed to know that there's not really a magic formula that chaplains use. And honestly, most of the suicide intervention that I do as a chaplain and even as a pastor could pretty much be done just with a good friend that's compassionate and can listen and offers advice when asked. And so honestly, it's not like when someone comes to me with a problem, some suicide issue, that there's a magic formula. Basically, all I do is just try to find out what's going on. I ask a lot of questions. I try to get as much story as possible. And then I try to ask some questions about support structure and coping mechanisms. And then a lot of times, the person just kind of figures it out themselves, and they leave feeling a lot better with some direction, or maybe just a little bit of hope. And that's honestly a lot, 95% of what I do. Sometimes I refer to some ways they can get some help. Maybe they have an obvious deficiency going on, which is obvious to everybody but them. But honestly, most of what I do is pretty basic and self-explanatory and common sense.
So do you believe that just by the nature of more of the confidentiality that exists inside the Chaplain Corps, that soldiers might be more likely to kind of come talk to you versus other members of their chain of command because, well, there's more secrecy in terms of they don't have to deal with shame or kind of the negative impact of saying, well, if I tell my squad leader, my platoon sergeant, my platoon leader, hey, I'm feeling suicidal, I don't want to be perceived as weak, where that's not actually the case within the Chaplain Corps. They're not going to kind of share my dark secrets that I may not be able to handle myself.
That's a good question. I think it depending on the person, I think they can come at it from two sides. Some people appreciate that, the confidentiality of the Chaplain Corps, just knowing that whatever they tell a chaplain is going to stay with the chaplain. The chaplain can offer some advice or whatever, talk them through some stuff, but their problem is going to stay right there in the room. Other people look at it as, hey, this chaplain guy, I don't know him. I would rather go to somebody who I trust. And so many people, I think more people than not, actually don't go to the chaplain just because a lot of chaplains aren't really familiar with the people. And so a lot of suicide prevention classes that we do, we have a chart where we say, hey, if you were feeling suicidal, who would you go to? And clergy is one of the people listed. And most people, I've noticed, do not mark clergy. They mark friends and family over clergy. So while some people absolutely appreciate the confidentiality of the chaplain, I think a lot of people would just rather go to somebody that they're familiar with.
So I'm assuming the advice for the chaplains out there, especially new chaplains, is get out among your force and make sure you're talking to the soldiers or
Absolutely. You got in chaplain school, they say you have to smell like your soldiers. Just as a kind of a hint to do what they're doing, get involved, get to know them, and with the idea of the more that they trust you and the more that they feel comfortable with you, the more likely they will be to talk to you about their problems.
Well, I can definitely kind of relate to that with the chaplains I've seen with my units, because I've seen chaplains in battalions where you never saw them and they're kind of always doing some other activity at kind of the staff level. And I've seen chaplains like you that were always walking around
Oh.
Joe's, getting dirty, and so.
Well, in all fairness, I did shirk a lot of my duties, so it works both ways.
Yeah, that's why you have chaplain assistants, right?
Hopefully, you got a good one.
Yeah. So I guess my last question is about the GAT, which I don't think you answered earlier when I answered you. But the question is, I think the Army values only go so far, and the reason why the GAT's asking, like, do you have a sense of a spiritual center? Is that second layer of, like a, I don't know, sort of like a philosophy or religion of value systems to fall back to say, well, if there's conflicts, which there are some conflicts inside the Army values, that you have some other system to fall onto. So that's the question of, like, I don't know, in that sense, is religion or spirituality is a safeguard to prevention of suicidality?
I think it can be. I think spirituality and spiritual values, I think they can help in relation to suicidal issues. I would go at it from the idea of, if you're the more spiritual you are, the more in touch you are with your faith, the more faith you have in a creator. If you go down that road, I think you have a better chance of maintaining some degree of hope in your life, that there's something other than yourself, there's something bigger than yourself looking out for you. And so if you honestly believe that, then you're more likely to believe in some kind of hope and a way that says, you know what, my situation is bigger than what I see. I'm just going to have to trust that it's going to get better. And so, I don't know, maybe some people, if their faith is strong enough, that it'll pull them through some tough times. Whereas if you believe that all there is all you see, and your life is terrible, well, go see the chaplain.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I guess the one thing I want to bring up and make a point of is, if you have soldiers out there that think, well, my chaplain's Roman Catholic, or say a Baptist, or any given denomination, and I'm not a member of that denomination. Well, the Chaplain Corps is built to be basically a referral service or support network. So I could come to you if I was Buddhist and say, hey, help connect me with resources to my faith or providers for my faith. So if they're having trouble out there and they don't feel like, hey, I'm not connected, or I don't think I can speak well to my chaplain because it's the wrong denomination issue, it's really not that big a deal, because you're trained and specifically there to kind of provide universally for all the faiths and denominations.
Yes and no. Absolutely, we're there for everybody, but we are not allowed to do anything outside of our endorsement. And so, whatever you're endorsed as, that's all you can do and all you can preach, basically. So, my job as a chaplain is to perform or provide religious support. And so, if I can perform Protestant services. But if someone comes up to me and they need religious services that are outside of my scope, then I provide that for them by finding them resources, religious practices that'll help them out.
Okay.
So yeah, absolutely, we are a referral service as well.
So I guess that's the end of the formal aspect of this interview, but is there any other thoughts that you have about there that you'd like to get out, or anything that I didn't ask you that's kind of a burning subject on your mind concerning suicide in the military?
So suicide in the military is interesting, and there's a lot of research that's been done, even some of your videos, very informative. And I think a lot of it basically comes down to relationships and how connected people feel to each other. Because it's natural when someone has problems, and everybody has problems, to go talk to somebody about it. And so the more connected they are, the more likely they are to find someone that can help them out. And so I would just hope that people reach out, whether you're struggling or not. At some point you will, and maybe you can help somebody else. But suicide is something that I believe can be prevented if there's the right structure in place. And I believe that structure includes a lot of connectedness.
I'd like to thank Pastor Kumor for taking the time with me today for this interview. I wish him and his family well. I'm excited to hear the news that he will soon be returning back to active duty as a full-time Army chaplain. If you like this video and wish to see other videos on this topic and other topics connected to Army self-development, I invite you to subscribe to the Evolving Warfighter. Until next time, focus on your self-development so we can ensure that we dominate the modern battlefield.